The dust-laden wind carried a woman's stifled cries across the desolate plains of Wyoming Territory, 1876, stopping Henry Blackwood in his tracks. The seasoned cowboy reined in his paint horse, squinting against the setting sun to make out a figure tied to a lone cottonwood tree several hundred yards ahead. What began as curiosity quickly turned to alarm as the silhouette took shape, a woman bound with thick rope, her head hanging in defeat. Henry urged his horse forward, his weathered hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. As he approached, he could see she was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with disheveled honey-brown hair falling over her face. Her simple calico dress was torn and dirty, evidence of rough handling. "Madam," Henry called out cautiously, dismounting and approaching slowly, "are you hurt?" The woman's head snapped up, revealing a face streaked with dust and tears, but with defiant hazel eyes that locked onto him with suspicion. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse but firm. "Unless you're here to help me, just ride on." Henry removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and a face tanned from years under the western sky. "Name's Henry Blackwood. I aim to help if you'll let me." He stepped closer, now seeing the bruises on her wrists where the ropes had cut into her skin. "Who did this to you?" "Men from Blackwater Ridge," she replied, glancing nervously toward the east. "They'll be back by nightfall. Her voice faltered. "They're planning to sell me to a man in Montana." Henry's jaw tightened as he pulled out his hunting knife and began sawing through the ropes. "You got a name?" "Hannah," she whispered. "Hannah Lowell." "Well, Miss Lowell, I reckon you're coming with me," Henry declared, slicing through the last rope. "You're mine now, far as anyone else is concerned." Hannah's eyes widened with alarm. "Not like that," Henry quickly clarified, his voice softening. "I mean to say, if anyone comes looking, you're under my protection. I've got a homestead about half a day's ride from here. You'll be safe there until we figure out what to do next." Hannah rubbed her raw wrists, studying the tall cowboy before her. He stood over 6 feet, broad-shouldered but lean, with a face that bore the lines of hardship and weather rather than cruelty. "Why would you help me?" she asked warily. "You don't know me." Henry looked away momentarily, his gaze sweeping the horizon. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good folks look the other way." He offered his hand. "Can you ride?" Hannah nodded, accepting his calloused hand. "My father taught me before he passed." Henry helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. "Hold tight. We need to make good time before anyone comes looking." They rode hard across the open prairie as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and crimson. Hannah sat rigid at first, uncomfortable with the proximity to this stranger, but as the miles stretched on, exhaustion forced her to lean back against his chest. "Who are you running from?" Henry asked, his voice rumbling against her back. Hannah sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I came west with my uncle after my parents died. We were supposed to start fresh in Blackwater Ridge, but—" She paused. "He gambled away everything, including me. To settle his debts, he let them take me." Henry's arm tightened protectively around her waist. "No man has the right to trade another human being, not ever." As night fell, they reached a small creek where Henry insisted they rest the horse. He helped Hannah dismount, steadying her when her legs buckled beneath her. "We'll rest here briefly," he said, leading the horse to water. "There's jerky in my saddlebag if you're hungry." Hannah found the dried meat and took small, careful bites. "How much farther to your homestead?" "About 4 more hours," Henry replied, scanning the darkness. "We should reach it before dawn." They rode through the night, the vast expanse of stars illuminating their path. Hannah drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and Henry's solid presence behind her. As promised, they arrived at Henry's homestead just as the eastern sky began to lighten. It was a modest, sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. "It's not much," Henry said apologetically as he helped her down. "But it's paid for and no one bothers me out here." Hannah looked around, taking in the peaceful solitude. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean. A A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rough-hewn table and chairs nearby. A curtain divided the space, concealing what Hannah assumed was a sleeping area. "You can take the bed," Henry said, already moving to light a fire. "I'll sleep by the hearth." Hannah stood awkwardly in the center of the room. "Mr. Blackwood, Henry," he corrected. "Henry," she continued, "I don't know how to repay your kindness, but I won't be a burden. I can cook and clean and help with whatever needs doing." Henry straightened, his expression serious. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Lowell. You're not a servant here. You're a guest until it's safe for you to move on, if that's what you choose." Hannah blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you," she whispered. In the following days, Hannah gradually adjusted to life at the homestead. True to her word, she insisted on helping with daily chores, cooking meals, tending the small vegetable garden, and mending Henry's worn shirts. For his part, Henry maintained a respectful distance, always careful not to intrude on her privacy. One morning, as Hannah was hanging laundry to dry, she noticed Henry watching her from where he was splitting wood. "Is something wrong?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Henry shook his head, a slight smile softening his weathered features. "Nothing wrong. Just thinking you bring life to this place." He returned to his chopping, leaving Hannah with a curious warmth spreading through her chest. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating venison stew, Hannah worked up the courage to ask about his past. "Have you always lived alone out here?" Henry stared into the flames, his expression unreadable. "No, I came west after the war, after Gettysburg, worked cattle drives for years before saving enough to claim this land." "You never married," Hannah ventured. A shadow crossed his face. "Was engaged once back in Missouri." "She didn't survive the fever that took half the town in '68. Hannah reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. "I'm sorry." Henry's fingers twitched beneath hers, but he didn't pull away. "Life out here is hard on women, harder than it is on men, I think." "Yet women endure," Hannah said softly. "We always have." Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted between them, a recognition of shared loss, perhaps, or the beginnings of understanding. The peaceful routine was shattered 3 weeks later when Henry spotted riders approaching from the east. He burst through the cabin door, his expression grim. 3 men coming. "Get your things and hide in the root cellar," he ordered, reaching for his rifle. Hannah's heart raced as she gathered her few possessions. "Who is it?" "Don't know for certain, but they're riding hard and purposeful. Nothing good brings men out this way in such a hurry." Henry lifted the trapdoor in the pantry floor, revealing a small storage space dug beneath the cabin. "Stay quiet, no matter what you hear," he instructed, helping her down. Hannah crouched in the darkness, listening to Henry's boots cross the wooden floor above. The cellar smelled of earth and stored potatoes, but all she could focus on was the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Muffled voices reached her, men demanding, Henry responding calmly. Then footsteps entering the cabin, more heated words exchanged. Hannah held her breath when the floorboards creaked directly overhead. "I'm telling you, Blackwood, the woman's stolen property," a gruff voice insisted. "Lawson paid good money for her contract, signed by her own kin." "No such thing as a contract on a person," Henry replied evenly. "Not since the war ended. This ain't about slavery," another voice cut in. "It's about debt settlement. Her uncle owed Lawson, and she was the payment." "Well, I haven't seen any woman fitting that description," Henry said, "but you're welcome to look around if it'll satisfy you." Heavy footsteps moved throughout the cabin. Hannah pressed herself against the wall when the trapdoor rattled, but it didn't open, likely blocked by something Henry had placed there. The confrontation ended without violence, but Henry's warning when he helped her from the cellar was stark. "They'll be back, and with more men next time." Lawson isn't the type to let go of what he considers his. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the moonlit landscape, aware of Henry doing the same from his bedroll near the hearth. "We could leave," she suggested finally. "Go somewhere they won't find us." Henry turned to look at her, his expression thoughtful. "Where would you go if you could choose?" Hannah hadn't allowed herself to consider such possibilities. "Oregon, perhaps. I've heard the Willamette Valley is beautiful, or California. Both fine choices," Henry agreed. But running has its price. You'd always be looking over your shoulder. What's the alternative? Hannah asked, frustration edging her voice. Wait until they return with enough men to overpower you. Henry rose and joined her at the window, careful to maintain proper distance. There's another way. We could make your situation legal beyond reproach. Hannah frowned, confused. What do you mean? Henry met her gaze directly. Marriage would give you my name and my protection under the law. No man could claim you as payment for another's debt. Hannah's breath caught. You would marry me, a stranger. You're hardly a stranger after nearly a month, Henry said with a hint of a smile. I know you're strong, capable, and braver than most men I've ridden with. I know you sing to yourself when you think no one's listening, and you've somehow made this cabin feel more like a home than it has in all the years I've lived here. He looked away, suddenly self-conscious. It would be a marriage of convenience, of course, I wouldn't expect. That is, your virtue would remain intact, but it would give you legal standing. Hannah studied his profile, the straight nose, the firm jaw now covered with several days' stubble. In the short time she'd known him, Henry Blackwood had shown more integrity than any man she'd ever met. And if I wished to leave someday, she asked quietly. Then I would help you go, he promised. All I ask is that you stay until we're certain the danger has passed. Hannah considered his offer, weighing her limited options. Very well, she said finally. I accept your proposal, Mr. Blackwood. Henry's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to agree. We'll ride to Silver Creek tomorrow. There's a judge there who can perform the ceremony. The following morning, they set out early, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. Hannah wore her freshly washed dress, her hair neatly braided and pinned beneath a bonnet Henry had produced from a trunk, a remnant from his former fiancée, though he didn't say so. Silver Creek was a small but growing town, with a main street lined with false-fronted buildings. Henry led her directly to a white clapboard structure that served as both courthouse and judge's residence. Judge Wilkins was a portly man with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense manner. After listening to a carefully edited version of their circumstances, he agreed to perform the ceremony immediately. "Do you have rings?" he asked, peering over his spectacles. Henry shook his head, but then reached into his pocket. Just this, he said, producing a simple silver band engraved with a pattern of oak leaves. It was my mother's. Hannah stared at the ring, overwhelmed by the significance of the gesture. Henry, I couldn't possibly. She would have wanted it used in a marriage based on respect, Henry interrupted gently. Please. The ceremony was brief but solemn. Hannah felt a curious mixture of nervousness and peace as she repeated the vows, accepting Henry's ring and his name in exchange for protection. When Judge Wilkins pronounced them husband and wife, Henry hesitated only briefly before placing a chaste kiss on her forehead. Mrs. Blackwood, he murmured, the name sounding foreign but not unpleasant on his lips. They spent the night at Silver Creek's modest hotel, Henry insisting on taking a separate room despite the knowing looks from the proprietor. The next morning, they purchased supplies and began the journey home, both acutely aware of their altered relationship, yet uncertain how to navigate it. Life settled into a new routine at the homestead. Henry continued to sleep near the hearth despite Hannah's insistence that they could share the bed with a bolster between them. They worked side by side during the day, their movements gradually becoming more synchronized, more comfortable. Nearly 2 months after their wedding, disaster struck. Hannah was alone at the cabin, Henry having ridden out at dawn to check on a distant section of fencing. She was kneading bread dough when the door burst open, revealing 3 armed men, the same ones who had come searching for her before. Well, well, the leader sneered, removing his hat. If it isn't the runaway bride, Lawson will be mighty pleased we found you. Hannah backed away, reaching for the shotgun Henry kept by the door, but one of the men was faster, knocking it from her grasp. Now, don't be difficult, the leader said, advancing on her. You can come quiet-like, or we can burn this place to the ground after we're done with you. I'm a married woman, Hannah declared, showing them her ring. I'm legally Hannah Blackwood now. Whatever arrangement you had with my uncle is void. The men exchanged glances. That true? One asked. Don't matter. the leader snapped. Lawson paid for her and he means to have her. A quickie wedding don't change that. They seized her roughly, binding her hands despite her struggles. Hannah screamed and fought, managing to land a solid kick to one man's shin before another struck her across the face, dazing her. They dragged her outside and threw her across a horse. As they prepared to ride out, a single rifle shot cracked across the clearing, followed by Henry's commanding voice. "Let her go, or the next bullet goes through your skull." He stood at the edge of the trees, rifle aimed steadily at the leader's head. "This ain't your concern, Blackwood," the leader called back. "This woman belongs to Lawson by right of contract." "That's my wife you're manhandling," Henry replied, his voice deadly calm. "And the only contract that matters is the one we signed before God and Judge Wilkins." One of the men shifted nervously. "Daggett, maybe we should." "Shut up," Daggett hissed. "He's one man with one rifle. We've got 3 guns. And I've got a Henry repeater with 16 rounds, Henry countered, taking a step forward. "How many of you want to die today?" Tense seconds passed as both sides calculated their odds. Finally, Daggett spat on the ground. "Lawson ain't gonna let this go." "Then tell Lawson to come himself," Henry suggested. "I'll be waiting." With venomous glares, the men released Hannah, shoving her roughly toward Henry before mounting their horses and riding away with parting threats. Henry lowered his rifle and rushed to Hannah, gently untying her bonds. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice breaking as he examined the bruise forming on her cheek. "I'm all right," she assured him, though she was trembling. "They surprised me. I'm sorry, don't apologize," Henry interrupted fiercely. "This is on them, not you." He hesitated, then pulled her against his chest in a protective embrace. "I never should have left you alone." Hannah found herself clinging to him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "You can't be here every moment," she said against his shirt, "and they'll be back, won't they?" Henry's arms tightened around her. "Yes," he admitted, "but next time we'll be ready." Over the following days, they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Henry reinforced the cabin windows and doors, positioned obstacles for cover in strategic locations, and taught Hannah how to use both the shotgun and his spare revolver. "Aim for the center of the body," he instructed as she practiced with targets he'd set up. "It's the largest target and the most likely to stop a man." Hannah proved a quick study, her determination overcoming her initial discomfort with firearms. "My father would be shocked," she remarked after successfully hitting a series of bottles. "He believed ladies should never handle weapons." Henry smiled, a rare full smile that transformed his serious face. "Your father never met a frontier woman, I reckon. Out here, being able to protect yourself isn't just proper, it's necessary." That night, a thunderstorm rolled across the plains, rattling the cabin windows and illuminating the interior with flashes of lightning. Unable to sleep, Hannah found Henry sitting at the table, cleaning his weapons by lamplight. "May I join you?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress. Henry nodded, setting aside the gun oil. "Storm keeping you awake, that and other things," Hannah admitted, taking the chair opposite him. "I've been thinking about our situation." "What about it?" Hannah gathered her courage. "When you proposed this marriage, you said it was for convenience, for my protection. Is that still all it is to you?" Henry went very still, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "What are you asking, Hannah?" "I'm asking if..." She faltered, then pressed on. "If you might ever come to see me as more than someone to protect, as a true wife." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rumble of distant thunder. Finally, Henry reached across the table and took her hand. "I already do," he confessed quietly. "But I made you a promise that I wouldn't expect more than you were willing to give." Hannah turned her hand to intertwine their fingers. "What if I'm willing to give more now?" Henry's breath caught audibly. "Hannah, are you certain?" "There's no rush, life out here is uncertain," she interrupted. "Tomorrow, Lawson and his men could arrive, one of us could be hurt or worse. I don't want to waste whatever time we have because of misplaced propriety." She stood and rounded the table, then boldly sat on Henry's lap, her arms encircling his neck. "I'm choosing you, Henry Blackwood. Not because you rescued me or because you married me for protection, but because in these months together, I've come to care for you deeply." Henry's hands hovered uncertainly at her waist before settling there, warm and secure. "I never expected to find someone again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After losing Elizabeth, I thought that part of my life was over. And now," Hannah prompted, her heart pounding. In answer, Henry kissed her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded eagerly. The storm raged outside, but within the cabin, a different kind of tempest was brewing as years of loneliness gave way to newfound passion. Later, lying in what was now truly their shared bed, Hannah traced the scar that ran along Henry's collarbone, a souvenir from Gettysburg, he'd told her. "Do you ever regret coming west?" she asked. Henry considered the question, his fingers absently stroking her hair. "There were times I did. The isolation wears on a man, but now," he tightened his arm around her. "Now I'm grateful for every step that led me to that cottonwood tree where I found you." Hannah smiled against his chest. "Even knowing the trouble I brought with me, especially that," Henry replied with unexpected humor. Life was getting too peaceful anyway. 5 days later, their vigilance was rewarded when they spotted a larger group of riders approaching from the east, 6 men, led by a figure in a black coat whom Henry identified as Lawson himself. "Stay inside," Henry instructed, handing Hannah the shotgun. "Use it if anyone gets past me." Hannah gripped the weapon, her mouth set in a determined line. "Be careful," she said, kissing him fiercely before taking her position by the reinforced window. Henry walked out to meet the riders, stopping in the yard with his rifle held casually but ready. The men halted about 30 yards away, their horses shifting nervously. "Blackwood," the man in the black coat called out, "I believe you're harboring something that belongs to me." "Nothing here belongs to you, Lawson," Henry replied evenly. "But you're welcome to water your horses before you head back to Blackwater Ridge." Lawson's laugh was cold. "I admire your nerve, but let's be reasonable. The woman's uncle signed a legally binding contract. Her services were purchased fairly." "No contract involving the sale of a human being is legal in this territory," Henry stated firmly. "And she's my lawfully wedded wife now, with documentation filed in Silver Creek." Lawson dismounted, signaling his men to remain mounted. "I invested a considerable sum in that woman," he said, approaching slowly. "I'm a businessman, Blackwood. Perhaps we can reach a settlement compensation for my loss." Henry's expression remained impassive. "The only settlement on offer is this: you turn around, ride away, and never come near my wife again. And if I decline, then this ends badly for you," Henry said simply. "I've notified the territorial marshal about your activities. He's quite interested in investigating claims of human trafficking." Lawson's face darkened. "You're bluffing." "Marshal Dawson will be passing through next week," Henry countered. "Stay around if you'd like to discuss it with him personally." A tense standoff ensued as Lawson weighed his options. His eyes flicked to the cabin, where the barrel of Hannah's shotgun was visible through a window slit. "You think you've won," Lawson finally said, his voice tight with anger. "But remember, this frontier justice has a way of finding people when the law falls short." "Is that a threat?" Henry asked calmly. Lawson smiled thinly. "Consider it a business forecast." He turned and walked back to his horse. "Let's go," he ordered his men. "There are other investments to pursue." Henry stood his ground until the riders disappeared over the horizon, then returned to the cabin where Hannah was waiting, shotgun still at the ready. "Is it over?" she asked anxiously. Henry set his rifle aside and took her in his arms. "For now." "Lawson's the type to hold a grudge, but he's also a businessman. If pursuing you becomes too costly or risky, he'll move on. And if he doesn't," Henry looked down at her with determination in his eyes, "then we'll face whatever comes together." The expected reprisal from Lawson never materialized. Whether deterred by Henry's mention of the marshal or simply deciding the effort wasn't worth the reward, he appeared to have abandoned his claim on Hannah. As summer turned to fall, life at the homestead took on a different rhythm. Hannah's initial gratitude toward Henry had blossomed into genuine love, and his protective instincts had deepened into devoted partnership. They worked the land together, expanding the garden and adding a second room to the cabin. One crisp October morning, as they were harvesting the last of the season's vegetables, Hannah suddenly felt lightheaded and had to sit on the ground. Henry was at her side instantly, concern etched on his features. "What's wrong?" Hannah took a deep breath, a suspicion forming in her mind. "Nothing's wrong," she said slowly, "but I think I might be with child." Henry stared at her in wonderment, his weathered hand gently covering hers. "A baby, are you certain?" "Not entirely," Hannah admitted. "But it's been 2 months since my last monthly, and I've been feeling queasy in the mornings." A smile spread across Henry's face, not the reserved smile she'd grown accustomed to, but a radiant expression of pure joy. "A family," he whispered, as if testing the word. "Our family." Hannah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. From being chained to a tree to becoming a mother, quite a journey in half a year. Henry gathered her carefully in his arms. "When I found you that day, I had no idea I was finding my future," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I only knew I couldn't leave you there. And I was terrified when you said she's mine now," Hannah recalled with a small laugh. "Little did I know what those words would come to mean." That evening, they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. Henry's arm was around Hannah's shoulders, her head resting against him as they discussed names for their child. "If it's a boy, perhaps after your father," Henry suggested. Hannah smiled, placing her hand over his where it rested protectively on her still flat stomach. "I was thinking Henry, actually, for the man who saved me." Henry kissed the top of her head. "And if it's a girl, Hope," Hannah said without hesitation. "Because that's what you gave me when I had none left." As darkness settled over the prairie, they remained on the porch, listening to the night sounds and planning their future, a future neither could have imagined when fate brought them together beneath a lonely cottonwood tree. Spring arrived with gentle rains and new life. Hannah gave birth to a healthy daughter with her father's determined chin and her mother's hazel eyes. They named her Hope Elizabeth Blackwood, and her first cries filled the cabin that had once seemed so empty to Henry. 2 years later, a son joined their family, Henry James Blackwood, Jr., with his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick smile. By then, the homestead had grown as well, with a larger cabin, expanded fields, and even a few hired hands to help with the increasing workload. Lawson never returned, though they later heard he'd been arrested for illegal dealings in Montana Territory. Hannah's uncle disappeared from Blackwater Ridge shortly after her marriage, presumably to avoid his other creditors. On the 5th anniversary of the day Henry found Hannah chained to the tree, they revisited the spot, now accompanied by their children. The old cottonwood still stood, though weathered by more seasons of wind and sun. "It looks smaller than I remember," Hannah remarked, watching Hope chase butterflies around the trunk. Henry squeezed her hand. "Some memories loom larger than reality." Hannah looked up at him, her face now more confident than the frightened young woman he'd rescued. "That day, when you said I was yours, did you have any idea what you were starting?" Henry shook his head, smiling at their son who was attempting to climb onto his boot. "I only knew I couldn't ride away. Something told me my life would never be the same if I did." "Mine either," Hannah agreed, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their children play in the shadow of the tree that had witnessed the beginning of their unlikely love story. "And I'm grateful every day that you stopped."